It has almost been 15 years since I first stood at that cliffside, yet the scene still sends a cold shiver down my spine. Even after 15 years, nothing quite feels like Skyrim. The low, humming strings from the soundtrack begin to swell, layering perfectly over the howl of the wind. I stop at that moment and watch the light dancing above. Even when comparing Skyrim to other Bethesda titles like the alien mushroom-covered landscapes of Morrowind or the vibrant high fantasy hills of Oblivion, the charm of Skyrim remains unmoved. There's a different level of intrinsic beauty behind this title. Is it due to the scale of the mountains, the unforgettable quest lines, the iconic characters, the epic score, or is it simply just everything? To understand this, we have to sit back and look at what makes this world so enduring. I have spent hundreds of hours in other worlds trying to find this specific spark. Take Dark Souls, for example, which is a game I love deeply. It has a charm that is entirely its own. It is heavy and demands your absolute focus. In Lordran, every corridor is a question of survival. You are constantly on the edge, clutching the controller with sweaty palms, scanning every shadow for the threat. There is an incredible, distinct high in finally overcoming a boss that has broken you a dozen times over and over again. It is a world of many struggles that punishes you for making the wrong choices. But even as I sat by those flickering embers, it never quite touched the same nerve that Skyrim does. Dark Souls, it is a masterpiece, yet it is strangely exhausting. In Skyrim, when I stand on this cliff, I'm not just looking for a way forward. I'm not worried about what is lurking in the shadows behind me. I am just simply there. This is where the two worlds diverge. Dark Souls is about the individual struggle against the world. It always feels like a game. A fair, brilliant, punishing game. Skyrim, however, feels like a place. It lacks the mechanical tightness of a Soulslike, but it does possess a sense of home that Lordran can never replicate. Skyrim is about presence. I can pick up the controller and decide, for no reason at all, just to walk towards the Whiterun under the cover of night. There is no pressure to level up or get good. As I move past the stone walls of the lower districts, the soft strings of Jeremy Soul's score begin to swell. I don't have to worry about an archer on every rooftop or a trap behind every door. I can simply lean back and exist. The world is not a gauntlet to test me. It is a space that allows me to be. Skyrim, by comparison, is a world that is fundamentally at peace with your existence. When I walk through the gates of Whiterun, I am not calculating my stamina or checking my dodge roll timing. I am listening to the soundtrack and the ambience of the blacksmith's hammer and the idle chatter of the people who have nowhere to be. The world does not demand my focus. It rather invites it. This is the core of why even the best Souls-like can never truly replicate this feeling. A Souls-like world is beautiful and intricate, but Skyrim is a house with the lights on. One is a skill test, the other is a home for your imagination. You can spend an hour in Skyrim doing absolutely nothing productive. No leveling, no looting, and no killing, and it still feels like you had a full experience. In Dark Souls, if you are not progressing, you are just waiting to die. There is a specific kind of magic in a world that is willing to be mundane. In Elden Ring, for all its skill and mystery, the world is still screaming at you. Every gorgeous vista is punctuated by something trying to tear you apart. you are a tourist in a foreign land, but in Skyrim, you are a citizen of a province. You can own a house, you can work a job, or you can simply sit on a bench in the marketplace and watch the sun move across the sky. It is the difference between a world that is built for you to conquer and a world that simply allows you to be part of it. When I say nothing feels like Skyrim, I'm talking about that transition from being a player to being a resident. I am talking about the rare comfort that doesn't require you to be a hero, just to enjoy the view. When you look at other modern RPGs, the distinction becomes even sharper. Titles like The Witcher 3 or Cyberpunk 2077 are technical marvels. Their writing and character depth often surpass anything Bethesda has ever produced. But in those worlds, I often feel like a guest. I am playing as Geralt or V. I am following a script that was already intended for the player to complete. It is not my story, and I am just the actor performing the lines. Their story, their voice, their motivations, they all bind me. Then there are the Ubisoft-style open worlds. These games are terrified of silence, and they constantly treat the world as a fun fair. The maps are cluttered with side quests and checklists. Every 5 minutes, the game reminds you that there is a chest to loot or a camp to clear. It turns exploration into a grocery list. When every inch of the map is labeled and categorized, the world stops being a place to discover, to feel, to experience, and starts being a task to complete. And trust me, it really does feel mechanical. Even in the case of Skyrim, the map is littered with ruins, caverns, bandit camps, forts, or ancient Dwemer. But among all these markers, the world never forces your hand. It does not demand that you descend into the damp cavern or clear out the camp on the ridge just because it appears on your compass. You can simply stand on the road, admire the way the fog rolls through the pines, or head into a city to sit by a fire with a glass of mead. This lack of pressure is what transforms the environment from a level into a home. Skyrim understands that the value of the world is not measured by how many objectives you check off, but by how much you want to stay there even when you have nothing to do. And this is why we, yes, you and me, still return to it. We are not looking for better combat or deeper dialogue trees. We have those elsewhere. We are looking for a place we can finally stop being a player and just be ourselves. Yet beyond the calm and mundane, there lies a specific intent to the design of the game. I remember 2011 vividly. It was a year I sat down and watched the first episode of Game of Thrones. I saw the grey stone walls of Winterfell and the terrifying silence of the woods beyond the wall, and it left me with the hunger for that specific, grounded kind of fantasy. And after nearly 7 months, that thirst was quenched after Skyrim dropped in the most iconic date ever released. 11/11/11. The 11th of November, 2011 will always be a special day in my heart. I remember the air in my room was cold that night, which felt fitting. I sat through the opening cinematic. "Hey, prisoner, you're awake." These words have been memed into oblivion now. But back then, sitting in the biting cold of my room, they were a portal to a different land. The sky was grey this time. The clouds were moody. It was different than Oblivion and Morrowind. It had its own charm. It felt like exactly what I needed. And when I finally stepped out of that cave at Helgen and the valley opened up before me, I was not just playing a game anymore. I was answering a hunger that Game of Thrones had started in me months prior. Skyrim arrived at the perfect cultural crossroads. Fantasy was no longer a niche hobby for the nerds in the basement. It was becoming the language of the mainstream. If you loved the uncompromising gift of Waterfell, Skyrim was where you went to live. This timing created a funnel, pulling in millions of people who usually would not touch an RPG. You know, the casual crowds, the ones that lived on FIFA and Call of Duty. To keep them there, Bethesda utilized what I now recognize as soft design. Let's be honest, the combat is horrible. It's floaty, the AI is brain dead, and most fights are just a contest of who has a bigger stack of health potions. But on that first day, it didn't quite matter. The combat is terrible, but that just lets me soak in the time to admire the environment and the ambience. By letting me just block and slash my way through bandits, I can essentially take more time to focus on the environment. This is the same point I mentioned earlier when I compared it to Dark Souls. When the world doesn't have constant threats and traps, I don't have to be so alert and check my surroundings. I can just let my curiosity bewilder me. If I see that old fort up in the near distance, I can actually go there without much consequences. I don't have to be worried about an ambush or being bombarded by archers. And even if I happen to get ambushed, I can simply run away. And you know what? I can go south, north, west, or east, as the entire map is accessible right from the start. This accessibility is the core of that design. It prioritizes my comfort over a challenge. It doesn't want to gatekeep the experience. It wants me to stay. There were no invisible walls or out-of-bounds timers to snap me back into reality. The game did not demand my mastery. It demanded curiosity. But a frictionless world eventually feels like a toy. To keep the province from feeling hollow, Bethesda balanced that softness with what I call spiky physical details. I remember walking into a tavern for the first time and accidentally knocking a silver plate off the table. I watched it clatter and roll across the floor, spinning until it settled in the dirt. It was not loot. It has no value to my quest. But that bit of physics made the world feel so heavy and occupied. I'll admit, sifting through hundreds of wooden cups, cabbages, and individual gold coins can be tedious. But this clutter is what populates a home. It creates a sense of presence that higher resolution games often lack. This ties into the art team's philosophy of epic reality. They didn't care that the animations were stiff or the textures were dated even before 2011. They wanted every frame to look like a loose alla prima painting, much like the works of John Singer Sargent. If you ever stood in front of a Sargent portrait, you know the magic of the 6-foot rule. From afar, the image is a masterpiece in harmony, but as you step closer, the illusion breaks down into bold, singular, and almost aggressive brushstrokes. It looks unfinished, yet perfectly placed. Skyrim operates on this exact frequency. When I stand on the ridge in the Reach and look out over the valley, the world is in total harmony. The values of the greystone, the dark greens of the pines, and the pale blue of the mist all blend into a singular, cohesive image. It feels solid. But as I walk closer to a rock face or a tree trunk, I see those brushstrokes, low-resolution textures, and simple geometry. Yet, like Sargent painting, it does not matter that the detail is not fine. What matters is that the values are correct. The light hits the world in a way that the brain recognizes as true. Even if my eyes see the pixels, compare this to a Monet. If Sargent is about the structure of the light, Monet is about the sensation of it. When the sun begins to set over the marshes of Helmark, the world shifts into an impressionistic dream. The color begins to bleed into one another, fading tones of oranges and violets that Monet spent his entire life trying to capture in his haystacks and water lilies. In these moments, Skyrim stops being a collection of assets and starts being an atmosphere, It isn't trying to show me a realistic marsh. It's trying to show me the feeling of standing in a marsh as the light dies. Most modern games strive for a hyper-realistic, indirect painting style. They layer detail upon detail, texture upon texture, trying to convince you through sheer technical density. They want you to see every pore on a face and every scratch on a sword. But Skyrim takes the alla prima approach. It gives you the essence of the province in one go. It relies on your imagination to fill in the gaps between the brushstrokes. That is why the world feels so enduring. A hyper-realistic game eventually looks old because technology always moves forward, but a painting never ages. Because Skyrim was built as an emotional landscape rather than a technical showcase, it remains as beautiful to me today as it was on that cold night in 2011. There is a specific phenomenon that occurs every time I take a trip to Skyrim. I might start my evening with a simple goal. Walk from Riverwood to Bleak Falls Barrow to retrieve the Golden Claw. It is a simple task, a straight-up shot to the mountain. But then I see the jagged silhouette of a standing stone against the grey sky, or I spot a rare butterfly fluttering towards a thicket of pines. Suddenly, the claw does not matter. This is the syndrome. In most modern open-world games, this is where the grocery list takes over. You see an icon, you clear the icon, and you move to the next. But in Skyrim, exploration feels earned because the game is willing to let you miss things. As lead designer Joel Burgess noted, side content is only meaningful if it's mandatory. When I stumble upon a hidden shrine or a stray shack in the woods, it doesn't feel like I'm checking off a box on a developer's map. It feels like a secret that was waiting specifically for me to find it. And once I am finally inside the cold halls of the Barrow, the game's reward system hooks me in instantaneously. It isn't about the big chest at the end of the dungeon. Instead, the entire journey through the dungeon is the compounded reward in itself. I find myself searching every dusty urn for a few gold pieces, checking every shelf for a stray skill book, and snatching up every blue butterfly wing. These are tiny incremental rewards. A single potion or a handful of arrows does not change my life. But when they are compounded over 30 minutes of crawling through a tomb, they create a significant sense of gain. By the time I reach the final chamber, I have not just finished a level. I have accumulated a haul. And there is the word wall. There is no sound in gaming quite like that low, guttering chant that starts when you get close to a word of power. You fight through the dark, you hoard your gold, and at the end, you are rewarded with not just a new shout, but it's technically dragon language. Foos! How cool is that? And then comes the rare mercy of the level designers. Navigating throughout the dungeon, beating the final boss, getting the loot, and getting out of the back using the same path would be extremely tedious and inefficient. Due to this, the devs have added shortcuts, whether it's by pulling a lever, a chain, or by opening a door. After you reach the end of the dungeon, you step out onto a hidden balcony or through a forgotten gate, and the world hits you all over again. Maybe you had entered the dungeon in the early mist of morning, and you had just spent the entire day inside the dungeon, and suddenly, when you go out, you could see the sunset casting long shadows over the pines, or a blizzard that forces you to squint. That transition is the pulse that keeps the momentum alive. It is the game's way of saying, "You've done well. Now look what else is out there." The momentum never breaks because the loop isn't just about what you carry in your pack. It's about the very way you grow. This is why we stay attached to the loop. It represents our time without demanding our labor. Whether I am spending 3 hours navigating the shifting cogs of a Dwemer ruin or 10 minutes picking leeks at a farm, I am making progress. The game doesn't gatekeep. It's content behind a grind. Most modern titles like Assassin's Creed eventually hit you with a recommended level that is 20 steps above yours, forcing you into a repetitive sludge of fetch quests just so you can see the next chapter of the story. Skyrim doesn't care. The world scales with me. If I want to finish the main quest at level 10, so be it, I can. If I want to wait until level 80 after I built 3 houses and mastered the Thuum, I can do that too. It is a loop that rewards curiosity over obedience. We are following the trail of our interests. When you remove the pressure to be efficient, you find something much more valuable: the freedom to be distracted. There is a common misconception in the gaming industry that more people equals a better world. We see massive studios with 500, sometimes 1,000 developers working on a single map. Yet many of those worlds feel like they were manufactured on an assembly line. They are technically perfect, but it lacks soul. Only 90 people built Skyrim. And when you spend enough time in this world, you start to feel the fingerprints of those individuals on everything you touch. You see it in the odd, unscripted encounters that happen while you're just trying to get from point A to point B. I'll be walking and see Imperial guards escorting a prisoner to some unknown fate. Or you will just encounter a random thief trying to steal loot from you. These moments aren't always quests, they are just life happening. The world doesn't pause for you to watch, it moves according to its own internal clock. Then there are the environmental stories. The ones that are never told in a dialogue box but are etched into the landscape. Some of these are so dark and layered they remind me of the cryptic storytelling in Dark Souls. Take Narfi's story in Ivarstead. On my first playthrough, I met him through a Dark Brotherhood contract. To me, he was just a target. I didn't think twice. Drew my bow, loosed an arrow, and moved on to the next payout. It felt like gameplay. But years later, after watching a deep dive by Camelworks, I realized I had stepped into a tragedy I barely understood. If you ignore the quest marker and actually look around Ivarstead, the pieces of a shattered life are everywhere. You can find the skeletal remains of his sister, Rhaeda, at the bottom of the river, still clutching the very flowers she went to pick. Though this might be a clear Easter egg or a reference to Ophelia from Shakespeare's Hamlet. But I doubt that, it's Rhaeda for sure. There are theories that Narfi, in a state of lycanthropy he couldn't control, might have been the one to kill her. When you realize that the man you just swiped off was a grieving, perhaps cursed individual living in the ruins of his family home, the world feels much heavier. This is the human touch I keep coming back to. It's why you find a random chest tucked under a jagged rock on a mountain peak where no quest would ever lead you. A developer put that there because they knew eventually a player would be curious enough to climb that specific rock. Take the Headless Horseman. I've encountered him only a handful of times in 15 years. He appears randomly at night, a ghostly figure riding full speed through the mist towards Hamvir's Rest. There is no quest attached to him, no reward, no explanation. He exists simply because a developer named Justin Schramm wanted to add a simple, dumb thing he was proud of. Even the most iconic locations in the game weren't always part of the plan. Blackreach, that massive bioluminescent civilization hidden deep beneath the earth, was essentially snuck in by 2 designers, Nate Perkypile and Joel Burgess. They pushed the engine to its absolute limit because they were obsessed with the idea of a world beneath the world. When I first descended into that blue-lit cavern, I felt a genuine sense of vertigo. I realized I wasn't looking at a level designed to keep me busy for an hour. I was looking at a passion project. I was seeing what happens when you give 90 talented people the freedom to compete with each other to see who can make the most immersive space. This is why the jank and the glitches, the Todd Howard charm, don't bother me as much as they should. I would rather play in a world that is occasionally broken by human ambition than one that is perfectly polished by a machine. It is the cumulative effect of these small, unnecessary details that transforms Skyrim from a digital product into a lived-in province. It's the reason the world feels whole. It wasn't built by a factory. It was built by architects who loved the world as much as we do. There is a strange contradiction in how Skyrim handles its stories. If you look at the major quest lines, which are the Thieves' Guild, the Dark Brotherhood, the College, the Winterhold, they are remarkably self-contained. I can become the Archmage of a college I barely attend, the leader of a guild of assassins who has been operating since the time of Elder Scrolls, and the savior of a world from an ancient dragon who has been prophesied to consume time itself. In any other game, this would be a narrative mess. A world-ending threat should demand my total attention. It shouldn't wait for me while I spend 3 weeks stealing silver platters in Riften or learning basic fire spells in Winterhold. But in Skyrim, this lack of consequence is a feature, not a bug. These quest lines give you a reason to exist in every corner of the province without the fear of being locked out of the rest of the world. By the time you've finished these threads, you aren't just a player who completed a story. You are a person with a history in every city. I have always found it fascinating how these guilds don't just offer quests and that they offer unforgettable moments. I remember the mission, Bound Until Death. Standing on that stone balcony in solitude, looking down at Vittoria Vicky's wedding, I felt like a true assassin operating in the shadows. The task was truly simple: assassinate her and bail out. Yet, due to the ton of choices offered during the assassination, the moment becomes strangely precious. Then you have the Thieves' Guild in Riften. It starts in a literal sewer among the Ratway outcasts, but as you progress, it shifts from petty thievery into something almost spiritual. I remember standing in the Nightingale Hall, pledging my soul to Nocturnal. The room was darkly lit only by a strange ethereal blue light. Suddenly, I wasn't just a pickpocket anymore. I was a guardian of the shadows. Now every time I walk through those mist-heavy streets, I'm not just a visitor. I'm a nightingale, and the shadows feel like they belong to me. Yet for all the depth found in these sprawling factions, there is one single quest that stands above them all for me. It isn't part of a grand prophecy, a guild initiation, or even a piece of the DLC. It is a one-off story hidden in the most ignored part of the province, nestled against the mountains between Dawnstar and Winterhold. Overlooking the freezing sea of ghosts sits Frostflow Lighthouse. Most longtime players will tell you that Skyrim's factions are actually one of its weakest points compared to previous titles. Oblivion lacked technical refinement, but it made up for it with incredibly compelling, morally complex writing. Skyrim put a lot of the heavy lifting on its updated mechanics and the beauty of the landscape, which often leaves the actual questing feeling a bit hollow. The Civil War is a perfect example. It was ripe for political intrigue, yet 90% of it is just killing low-level soldiers in identical forts. But Frostflow is the exception. It is one of the few places I still think about even after 15 years and 2,000 hours in this game. The northern reaches of Skyrim are bitter. The animals are hardened and fearsome, and the two towns in the north truthfully don't have much to offer you, unless you are here for the college or a specific Daedric artifact. There really isn't much reason to wander the snowy wasteland between them. I wouldn't be surprised if players who rely on fast travel never see this location at all. The summary of the quest is simple, yet devastating. A family of 4 buys a lighthouse to retire in peace. They hear scratching in the walls. The father, Hubd, assumes it's Skeevus and heads to town for traps. He returns to find his wife, Romani, murdered in the kitchen. He descends into the cellar to save his children, Manny and Sudi, only to find a hole ripped into a subterranean abyss filled with Falma and Chorus. What makes it unforgettable isn't the combat, it's the realization that you are too late. When you find Manny, he's a corpse in the snow. By the time you find Sudi, she has taken her own life with a dagger her father gave her, unable to bear the sound of him being eaten alive in the next room. When you finally slay the Chorus Reaper and find Hab's remains inside its stomach, the quest doesn't end with a quest complete banner. It ends when you read his wife's journal, remember his final wish, and carry his bones to the lighthouse flame yourself. It is special because it respects your intelligence. It doesn't put a marker on the urn containing the cellar key. It expects you to read the daughter's diary to find it. It doesn't tell you to cremate Habd. It expects you to care enough to do it. But if Frostflow represents the best of Skyrim's environmental storytelling, the Daedric quests are stories about the whims of gods who find mortals deeply amusing or deeply disappointing. One quest that stands out as a perfect subversion of the orcish honor trope is the Cursed Tribe. It begins at Lagershbur, an orc stronghold in the rift that feels like it's being slowly swallowed by the earth. Usually, these strongholds are symbols of immovable strength, but Lagershbur is under siege. Giants are literally at the gates, and the orcs inside are panicking. When you walk in, you meet Chief Yamaz, and he is the absolute antithesis of everything an orc is supposed to be. He is sick, he's bitter, and most importantly, he's a coward. The tribe is cursed because Malakath, the god of the spurned, is disgusted by Yamaz's weakness. He wants his chieftain to act like a leader. He demands that Yamaz travel to a distant cave to clear out the giants that have infested his shrine. This is where the quest shifts from mission to character study. I ended up escorting Yamaz to Fallowstone Cave. The journey felt less like a heroic trek and more like I was babysitting a fraud. Every time we encountered a troll or a bear, Yamaz would hang back, grumbling about how I was making him do all the work. But the climax of this encounter happens at Giant's Grove, a hidden beautiful pocket where a giant sits peacefully by Malakath's shrine. Yamaz, terrified of the creature, turns to me and offers a pathetic bribe. He asks me to kill the giant so he can take the credit. He says, "You do the work, I'll take the hammer back, and we both get what we want. If you agree to the bribe and kill the giant, Yamaz immediately betrays you. He tries to kill you to ensure his secret never leaves that cave. If you refuse the bribe and make him fight his own battle, he charges in with the 'this should only take a second' and is promptly launched into the stratosphere by the giant's club." And then Malakath's voice booms through the grove.
Yamaz was a fool, always trying to scheme his way out of responsibility.
He isn't angry that his chief is dead. He's relieved. He calls Yamaz a pathetic weakling and a fool. He doesn't mourn the man, rather, he is happy that the job is done. When you return the giant club to the stronghold, Malakath transforms it into Volendrung, the Hammer of Might. It is a massive glowing artifact of pure power, a reward that feels earned. It also happens to be my most favorite Daedric weapon, as it looks really cool. The quest stays with me because it highlights the irony of the gods. Malakath is the father of the orcs, yet he has zero sentimentality for them. He would rather see a chief crushed by a giant than see his tribe led by a liar. If the landscape of Skyrim is the body of the experience, then Jeremy's soul's score is its soul. I find it fitting that the two moons hanging in the night sky, Massa and Secunda, share their names with tracks on the soundtrack. I remember the first time I visited Whiterun on a night so cold I could almost feel the frost on my own breath. I had just passed through the gates, the torches of the guards flickering against the white stone walls. When the sky opened up, those twin moons hung there. Then, suddenly, the piano music of Secunda hit. The experience was truly unforgettable. It wasn't just background music. The melody is delicate, almost fragile. It consists of these lonely ascending piano notes that seem to echo the very stillness of the tundra. At that moment, the game stopped being about dragons or civil wars. It became a meditation. I stood there, near the gildergreen tree, and realized that the music was perfectly capturing the awe-inspired sadness of the province. This is what unifies the community. We all play different races and follow different paths, but we all share this ethereal sound. I have realized over the years that this soundtrack is not just a loop of background noise. It is a collection of 5 distinct vibes that dictate exactly how you perceive the province at any given moment. Skyrim is the pinnacle of player glory. You are born of ancient blood, gifted with a power that takes average mortals a lifetime to even glimpse. The reality is etched into the more aggressive, fast-paced battle music. When the Dovazul chanting of the Dragonborn theme or the sharp metallic rhythm of steel on steel swells, the game is centering you as the most important force to learn. I remember my first encounter with a dragon on the Western Watchtower. Then the chanting starts. Dovaki, Dovaki. It feels like I'm being crowned as the Dragonborn. It is a terrifying, effective way of telling you that you aren't just another soldier in a civil war. You are a legendary being encountering your equal for the first time, and the music perfectly hypes you up for that. But eventually, the fire of the dragon soul dies down, and you find yourself in a Nordic burial tomb, or a cave that has seen no light for centuries. Here, the vibe turns. Tracks like Beneath the Ice, Death and Darkness, and Silence Unbroken use a low, droning bass that feels less like music and more like a warning. It makes you feel like an intruder. There is a specific suspense in these ancient halls, as if the very air is watching you steal from the urns of long-dead warriors. I spent my earliest hours in the game genuinely terrified while walking through Bleak Falls Barrow because the music sets the tone perfectly for a place where I was not meant to be. To survive the cold, you need the taverns. Tracks like The Bannered Mare or Around the Fire represent absolute sanctuary. They are some of the only songs that feature a physical lute, and the detail is crucial. It grounds the music in the room. In my early years on the PS3, these songs, it meant I was finally safe. I used to roleplay a simple life, hunting deer across the Whiterun tundra during the day, and retreating to the inn at night. The music is warm, inviting, and colored like parchment and mead. It is a safe space where the only thing you have to brace yourself for is the gossip of the locals. It reminds you that despite the dragons and civil war, there is still a corner of the world where you can simply sit by a fire and exist. Then there is the road music. Tracks like Far Horizons or Under an Ancient Sun. They capture a massive orchestral sound that mirrors the scale of the mountains. I spent a long time trying to learn Far Horizons on the piano because it somehow captures the physical feeling of standing on a summit and watching the sunset over the pines. It makes the trek from point A to point B feel earned. It turns a simple walk into a cinematic event, where the mountains feel taller and the world feels more expansive. It is the music of discovery making you feel small yet entirely significant in the vastness of the province. Finally, there is the in-between music. This is the music you hear when you stop rushing. Tracks like Ancient Stones or From Past to Present are, in my opinion, the greatest pieces of music in video game history. I remember standing outside my house in Whiterun late at night, looking up at the aurora and the light of Aetherius shining through the stars. For once, I stopped chasing a quest marker and just watched the world. There is a sense of awe-inspired sadness in these nighttime tracks, a thread that binds all your memories together. You can't touch the music, but in the silence of the Skyrim night, music is the only thing that feels real. When we pull back the curtain on the mechanics, the art style, and the loops, we find a truth that is rare in this industry. Skyrim is not a game you beat. It is a province you inhabit. We keep returning to this frozen land because it offers us something the modern world often refuses to provide: a sense of orientation. In our daily lives, we are often lost, but the moment the soft strings of far horizons swell and the twin moons rise over the tundra, the world becomes sacred. It is a place where your actions have weight, where the stars themselves grant you power, and where every mountain peak holds a secret meant only for you. We aren't looking for the technical perfection of The Witcher or the mechanical brutality of Dark Souls. We have those elsewhere. We come back to Skyrim because it is a house with the lights turned on. It is a world that was loved into existence by 90 people who cared enough to add ants to a log and ghost stories to a lighthouse. It has been 15 years since that cold November night in 2011. Since then, we have seen empires rise and fall in other games, but we are still homesick for this place. When I finally put down the controller and the screen goes black, I don't feel like I've just finished the session. I feel like I've just come home from a long journey. We are finally awake, not just to the game, but to the realization. A realization that for as long as the wind howls through the pines of Falkreath, we will always have a place where we can simply be. But as much as I value the transition from player to a resident, or the safety of the fire and the bannered mare, there is a limit to how long I can stay in the comfort of a world that is always by my side and bends to my will. Eventually, the peace starts to feel like stagnation. You find yourself looking for something that doesn't just invite your presence, but demands your absolute growth. You realize that while Skyrim is a beautiful alla prima painting you can inhabit, it is fundamentally a soft one. It is a world that always bends to my will. And there is another world, one that does not bend, one where the world is not just a scenery to sit back and admire, but a test of your martial prowess. You can always go home to Skyrim, but you can be truly tested in one place. Step back and join as we unravel and piece together another masterpiece. Let's understand why it can't get any better than Dark Souls.